I've decided to do my first Criterion film. I've been watching a lot of them here on YouTube, and they've been the primary way that I've found out about new films. Um, just word of mouth seems to work really great because it just, for me, it seems to work better than whatever happens to be popular at the time. Or a lot of some of the films I'm into are might be a little off the beaten path. So I'm just gonna just run through maybe a part one and do a part two later on. And so let's get started. My first film is this movie by Robert Bresson, I think is how you say his name. It's called L'Argent, I think is how it's pronounced. And it's just what was interesting about this guy, about this director, is that he'll just go with actors that have never acted before. You know, he likes people that they're not too experienced. And because it just, there's something about the acting that, it's like it doesn't seem overdone. It's pretty, I guess, subtle, kind of withdrawn a little bit more. And the style was kind of interesting to me. A lot of people, were surprised when I tell them that this guy would actually go out and, intentionally search out people who are not actors. And, but I think it actually worked really well. If you look on the disc, this is the main character, and I guess he basically just works as an architect. And when he was done with the film, he just went back to being an architect in real life. So that's just how this director's films are. And I thought that's pretty interesting. It surprisingly seemed to work. You wouldn't think it would, but anyway, so that was cool. My next film is Slacker, because I thought this also had, was very unique in that it's the only film that I've watched that I could even think of where there's essentially this movie really has no main actors at all. It's just this continuous movie of people just interspersed among other people, and it just flows on for however long this is, like probably an hour and a half, which is just I just thought it was an incredibly interesting idea. The one downside about this is that unfortunately it's not in widescreen and or wide format, and that's kind of a bummer. It would have made this good film even better, but it's still definitely worth watching. This other one, Black Moon, what intrigued me about this initially is I went on to Rotten Tomatoes, and the ratings for both the critics and just the general audience was pretty much exactly at 50%. 50% of people liked it and 50% of people hated it. And I just thought, that's probably the only movie that is rated that way. It seems like, either the general audience or the critics are on one side of liking it or not. But, just how interesting is that? So it's kind of a dreamlike movie where the director, I guess, went out of his way to make sure it didn't have any plot at all. So if that sounds interesting to you, I like kind of quirky stuff like that. So I had to check it out. And yeah, Black Moon. This is the one I just watched recently, 12 Angry Men. And I'm not really into... I wasn't really into watching another courtroom film. I've watched quite a few of them. I mean, I've probably watched, 6 or 7. And it's like, oh, I don't want to watch... I'm not really interested in going with another one. But when I heard somebody in another review explain it, where it's about a jury and how one of the men in the jury disagrees with the other 11, I thought, well, no, that's a really interesting story that I'd like to check that one out. So, and the last Criterion sale, I picked that one up. seconds is what intrigued me about this was that it has this really crazy camera work that looks nothing like any other movie I've seen. And as I as I found out from watching it, it's mainly more, I think, kind of more in the first half of the film that looks like that. But it reminded me a lot of the Alfred Hitchcock films I've seen, where he would always, where Hitchcock would always shoot things in these very odd perspectives that other people just didn't seem to think of, and I just thought that was really brilliant, and I just yeah the, this it just intrigued me to go see this. And so speaking of Hitchcock, I've got a few of the some Hitchcock on Criterion, and this is my favorite version of The Man Who Knew Too Much. There's a version from 1930s and a newer version from 1950s. So I kind of wish it would have that this disc could have both versions. I think that would be really neat. The 1950s version I watched in this box set, and it's in bad need of a new transfer. It needs the color is just really off. And in fact, I mean, this has about 15 films. From what I remember, all the other films look great, but it just the color was just not so good. I'd really like to see. I think they should do a version where they have fixed up color, and then maybe put it together in the same collection, because I think it's kind of neat when they do that. Sometimes they'll have a couple films, like they just did recently with the Godzilla box set, where you have about 2 films in each disc, and that's like it seemed kind of neat if they do something like that. So so even though this isn't Criterion, I thought, well, I might as well bring it up, as since I'm going through a lot of other Hitchcock stuff. When the presidential election was happening back in 2016, I wasn't really interested in following it very much, and I just, in fact, even when they were voting, I kind of just, I basically just turned off my phone and social networks and just kind of bunkered down in a living room to just watch this box set of Hitchcock, and a great use of time. I'd much rather watch a lot of these classic films. I mean, not only do you have stuff like Vertigo and North by Northwest, and but also maybe some underappreciated films like Rope. And so I'd check this out. I got this actually, I think, at about half off, so it was a really good deal, incredibly good deal. Yeah. The next Hitchcock film was probably the only movie where I bought it a second time. When I saw the cover, oh man, I love that cover. I mean, it's worth it almost just for that. But it's also got just a whole bunch of extras. So I may hope to get through that sometime. And it's also got, great big book, so probably one of the only movies where I felt it was worthwhile to get it a second time. This one is, apparently this is one of the movies that inspired Hitchcock to make Psycho, which is one of my top 10 favorite films of all time. So even though I'm not really a big horror fan, but it's just the story is just so exceptional. And but anyways, this is the one that inspired that movie. It's a fair amount different. You can see some kind of basic similarities, but I'd also recommend this one. Apparently Hitchcock was wanting to get the rights to shoot this film, which I think is based on a book. But maybe it was better that he didn't, because then he would later make Psycho, which is I mean, I think the probably what he should have uh, done instead. So maybe that worked out for the best. And I'd love to see more Hitchcock on Criterion. I think there's only, geez, there's probably maybe like five um, Hitchcock movies on Criterion at the moment, and I mean he's directed about 50, so maybe we'll see more at some point. The next one is Blowout, which is I think it's a excuse me, a remake of a 1960s film called Blow Up, and this was a so this is a remake with John Travolta from I think 1980s in 1981. Probably my favorite Brian De Palma film. Really imaginative camera work in several scenes of this film. The ending was very different from many films, and just definitely check this one out. Blow Up. In most people's lists, they usually put Seven Samurai in their lists. I hear about that one a lot. But my favorite Akira Kurosawa film, I would say, would have to be High and Low. And this is, I've probably watched about 5 of his films. So, it's just, I love the storyline about how he thought that his, there's a wealthy industrialist who was told that his son was kidnapped, and he was told this on the phone from somebody, and the father was desperate, and saying all the things he would do to get his son back, and how much he would pay to get back his kidnapped son. And then it turned out that it was actually another man's son who was in the room listening to all the things that this guy would do, or I should say it was the other man's son who was kidnapped. So it's a really interesting spin on a plot, and I just this is where I would start with Kurosawa, who also has a bunch of film, tons of movies just like Hitchcock, and so Tampopo was suggested to me at Barnes & Noble by one of their employees after I passed it up several times because, it's a movie based around ramen noodles. Which seems a bit ridiculous because it's like a movie about noodles. But anyways, believe it or not, it's actually a really good film. So, pick this one up. I think it's funny. Sometimes it's funny and sad at the same time. It's just fantastic. I really enjoyed this one. The next one is probably my favorite Wes Anderson film, I think. And I don't usually hear most people list this as their favorite, but it was about a guy that they checked into a kind of like a hotel, motel, and basically kind of this, if I remember the plot right, it was about kind of a love affair he's having with the person that cleans the housekeeping person, and if I remember right, I don't think she speaks English, so it's a relationship that they're going on between him and a translator, and it's just great film. Uh, this next one surprised me a bit. I'm not really a big fan of war films. Seeing a whole bunch of gore for a long time isn't really my thing. But the movie Shay, is that how you say it? Pronounce it? I'm not actually sure. I think I'm really mispronouncing it. But anyways, this one was incredibly fascinating to me because it's split into. You could see it split into two movies in this box set, and what you see is the first part of his being a military leader and the success he had at first, and then the second one is his downfall, and it's just it, there's a lot of stuff. I guess one reason I like it is it goes beyond just the fighting, and I like the interesting storyline about how his um, you know he, for his army, he wouldn't, no matter how good of a fighter somebody was, he wanted uh, everyone in his army to be really educated. He didn't want to just purely be on physical strength, and I thought that was kind of an interesting approach that I don't see in a lot of other war films. Not that I watch a ton of them, but it seems like that. Maybe that's you won't see that. I don't know. I guess I'd have to watch it to know. Watch more war films to know that for sure. But anyways, I enjoyed this one, and that was kind of a little bit of a surprise to me, I guess. But anyways, um, so I guess the last ones are some French films. Um, a lot of people have the 400 Blows, so maybe instead of talking about that one so much, um, this was another French film I enjoyed. It's about this guy, this kid, and his dad, and just they're kind of running a business, and um, pretty interesting storyline. And so I, this was kind of a blind buy. Not a lot of people talk about it, but I thought it was a good film. And finally, my favorite Wim Wenders movie, Paris, Texas. And so it's just about this guy. He's just wandering through a desert, and you find out later on that he's he's this character that's kind of aloof, and like he's not really talking to anybody that he passes along the way. He even passes along his brother, and so you keep wondering, like, well, what's up with this guy, and like what's the issue with his family? Why is he just wandering around? I mean, he doesn't, at times, if I remember right, he doesn't even seem to know. So, but it's a really great film, really beautifully shot. I mean, there were some uh, sunrise scenes that were just absolutely gorgeous, alongside the neon um, area that it was shot in. This was actually shot, well, okay, obviously shot in Texas, as is the name. And the reason for Paris is that there's apparently a town in the state of Texas called Paris, so it's different from the, Paris, France. And I really like this one, and yeah, definitely pick this one up. Really, and I can't remember if I said this, but even though most of the Wim Wenders I've watched, I think, are in German, this is actually in English, so a little easier if you're having a hard time following along with subtitles. So, yeah, that's really about all I think I got. I think, yeah. So, if you enjoyed it, I guess just let me know in the comments, or if you learned anything, I'd be interested to know in that. Hopefully, I went beyond just some of the basic ones that everybody says, and maybe they learned one or two things. And thanks for watching.